Throughout American history, African Americans have been chained by the locks of oppression. And even to this day, despite the Emancipation Proclamation and the Civil Rights Movement, racism against African Americans still endures. In the modern age, racism against African Americans has manifested in the form of racial profiling. Racial profiling is the use of a person's race or ethnicity by law enforcement to determine whether the individual is engaging in criminal activity. This type of racism has primarily stemmed from racial stereotypes. Research associate from the University of Maryland, Christopher Saintville, explains.
Racial profiling occurs because of fear and because of stereotypes. For the most part, groups of people tend to have certain qualities and stereotypes attached to them. And then when people are not educated or when people don't know enough about that group of people, they tend to let those stereotypes dictate how they think about them and how they interact with them as well. And so that's where racial profiling comes from stereotypical beliefs.
This practice is then fueled by legislation such as the tough on crime policies or policies such as stop and frisk.
Crime policies are essentially a perspective that's called broken windows theory, broken windows perspective. If you think about it, it makes sense in theory. It makes sense theoretically. So broken windows suggest that if you're in a neighborhood and there are broken windows, then this broken windows is an indicator that other crimes or other types of vandalism or property damage might also occur. So the point is, if you solve the broken windows, then you won't have broken down walls, you won't have broken down doors, you won't have dilapidated homes, you won't have a whole lot of crime. So part of that means policing the public streets, right? So as it relates to stop and frisk, what happens is that supposedly the idea is that when individuals gather in public, then in that case, this gives police officers the right to stop these individuals and frisk them to supposedly reduce the probability that people are going to interact in a particular way that might be inappropriate or even crime-ridden in a particular neighborhood. So in theory, that's what broken windows theory, these zero tolerance policies, and the other part of zero tolerance policies is that nonviolent crimes are going to be treated as if they're violent crimes, right? So in other words, if a person gets stopped and arrested for having, say, a small amount of marijuana or even a more dangerous drug, cocaine, crack, even prescription pills, then they're going to face a harsh penalty.
Racial profiling is a major problem that has had a major impact on the African American community. The effect of this practice on minors and adults alike spans the board. Yet racial profiling impacts the African American community in three major ways: by affecting the incarceration rate, the use of deadly force by law enforcement, and daily life. One major impact racial profiling has had is that it has affected the incarceration rate of African Americans. It has done so by causing people of color to be targeted for arrests, in turn rising the incarceration rate. According to the NAACP, 1 million of the 2.3 million people incarcerated in America are African American, and people of color are incarcerated at a rate of about 6 times more than whites. Adults make up the majority of these arrests. Currently, 1 in 6 African American men have been incarcerated as of 2001, and if this trend continues, 1 in 3 African American males born today will spend time in jail during their lifetimes. This goes along with the fact that 1 in 100 African American women are currently spending time in prison. Yet, African American adults are not the only ones affected by racial profiling. Racial profiling has had a major impact on minors. One major impact racial profiling has had on minors is that it has affected the rate of suspensions, expulsions, and detentions in schools for young men of color. Because of racial profiling, or more, racial misunderstanding in this case, African Americans, especially those in middle class families, are more susceptible to disciplinary actions in schools than whites. In fact, 35% of African American students in grades 7 through 12 have been suspended or expelled sometime in their school careers, compared to 15% for whites. Research Associate for the Black Studies Department of the University of Maryland, Christopher Saintville explains.
There's a lot of problems going on in inner city schools. But nonetheless, disciplinary measures, when you look at schools that are not in the city, where they have a huge number of problems are, like middle class schools, young black kids are suspended more and they receive detention more. Racial profiling, does that have something to do with it? I don't know if it's racial profiling, but cultural misunderstanding may have something to do with it, because maybe their behaviors are not understood and then they're basically suspended because teachers just don't understand their behaviors. People just don't understand their cultural styles. For example, when you see a young group of girls or a young group of boys of color who are acting, they may be acting loud and playing around, people from other cultures may not understand that they're playing around. People from other cultures may interpret their behavior as being violent or being provocative, for example. And sometimes when the students then are, being told that they have to stop, they may get an attitude, right? And then be upset that they're not allowed to express themselves the way they want, and then it boils up from there.
Yet racial profiling has not only impacted African American students by making them more susceptible to suspensions, expulsions, and detentions. This practice has also played a major role in making the high incarceration rate of young boys and girls of color as high as it is. According to the NAACP, African Americans represent 26% of juvenile arrests, 44% of youth who are detained, 46% of the youth who are judicially waived to criminal court, and 58% of the youth admitted to state prisons. Racial profiling by law enforcement has caused many people of the African American community, minors and adults alike, to undergo the harshness of prison life and to live forever with the tag criminal. Probably the most scrutinized and known impact of racial profiling is with the use of deadly force by law enforcement on the African American community. Because of racial profiling, African American men, women, and youth have been killed by law enforcement arguably more than any other minority. According to CNN, young African American men are 21% more likely to be killed by a police officer than young white men. This impact has been seen throughout the country with cases of usually innocent African Americans. This impact has been seen throughout the country with cases of usually innocent people of color being killed by law enforcement. One case, which is still talked about today, is the Trayvon Martin case. In this case, a 17-year-old boy by the name of Trayvon Martin was shot in the chest by neighborhood watchman George Zimmerman while walking home from a convenience store with nothing but Skittles and a can of iced tea in his pocket. This case, where an unarmed teenager was shot, was a great example of the deadly effect of racial profiling.
He profiled Trayvon because he looked at Trayvon because Trayvon had a hoodie on and he had baggy pants on, and he thought that he was trouble. So that sort of attire is associated with young men of color. So when people, ordinary people, aside from the police, believe that young men like that are a danger, then these are the situations that happen. The neighborhood watchmen, like you said, they go after them thinking that they're a threat to the community, when this kid may just be someone that's just walking through, going home to his parents' house.
Another case of this use of deadly force on African Americans by police is the Michael Brown case. In this controversial case, an unarmed teenager from Ferguson, Missouri, was shot and killed by a Ferguson police officer. The use of deadly force by law enforcement on African Americans was also present in the Eric Gardner case. According to Mr. Saintville, in this case, Eric Gardner was consistently harassed by NYPD officers and eventually choked to death, a practice currently banned in the city, for a minor violation of selling Lucy cigarettes. Yet these African American people aren't the only ones tragically killed by police due to racial profiling. Many more unarmed African Americans have been killed by police, much of the time because of racial profiling. In fact, the news website The Daily Beast said that from 1999 to 2011, African Americans accounted for 26% of all police shooting victims. And since the shooting of Michael Brown, at least 6 more African American minors have been killed by police. Because of racial profiling, oftentimes innocent African Americans have died at the hands of police. Yet, arguably, the most important impact racial profiling has had is its effect on daily life for all African Americans. Racial profiling has had a huge impact on daily activities such as just going to the store. Due to this practice, many African Americans all around the country are followed by suspicious store clerks when simply buying their groceries. In one event of racial profiling, a teenager by the name of Rashid Polo actually filmed a vine of a store clerk following him around a supermarket. Another event similar to this happened again as he posted another vine of a cashier following him around a gas station. In one case, an African American student from the New York City College of Technology was followed and later detained by two undercover police after legitimately buying an expensive belt from Barney's, New York. This practice has caused a great disparity in the amount of African Americans stopped and searched while driving compared to other races.
Well, for example, in one instance in New York, you have the policy called stop and frisk, where the police have basically been allowed to, and legally, to stop and search any young man of color. Well, they're supposed to be able to stop anyone, but the majority of people that they end up stopping are young men of color.
This practice has impacted people of color in a powerful way by instilling fear.
So it creates something what they call stereotype threat. You just wondering what other people are thinking at all times. You have to watch yourself. And sometimes, just being a good person doesn't cut it. Sometimes just, somebody may think that you're doing something all because of stereotypes.
Although these issues may seem like small annoyances or paranoia, there are important and often neglected things that show the effects of racial profiling on the African American community. Racial profiling has had a tremendous effect on people of color. It has caused many, often innocent, African Americans to suffer the harsh environment of prison. It has caused many black families to endure the heartbreak and pain of losing a loved one, and it has caused them to be suspected of crime, even in an activity as simple as shopping, all because of skin color and stereotypes. Yet racial profiling has not been left unheard of. Thousands across the country have stood up for those who have been racially profiled against in the form of protests, such as those in Ferguson after the Michael Brown case, media, such as the movie Fruitvale Station, the story of Oscar Grant III, an unarmed man shot by police in California, and many other mediums. These efforts for justice and awareness have spurred many legal efforts to curb the use of this terrible practice by law enforcement. Last year, the Obama administration announced new police regulations to prevent racial profiling in the FBI and on national security cases. Plans to create a task force tasked with building public trust, a $263 million community policing initiative, which includes the equipping of body cameras for about 50,000 police officers, and an executive order to tighten the use of military-grade weapons and equipment to local police forces was also announced. Yet, despite these efforts to curb racial profiling by the government and the people, the fact remains that this practice is still very evident in society and is still very impactful on the lives of thousands of African American men, women, and children. Racial profiling is a problem that has plagued the nation for decades and is a problem that may plague it for years to come.